Traditionally, in a world before COVID at least, you'd get up in the morning, maybe work out and grab some breakfast, clean yourself up and get ready for the day ahead. And for the majority of the people out there, before the daily commute was crossing the hall to the dining room table, the trip to work consisted of getting in a car with lots of seats, sitting in traffic, and slowly losing the will to live. Motorcyclists will tell you that riding a motorcycle to work is one way of alleviating the boredom. They're quick, at least in places where you're allowed to filter through traffic. They're fun, and they're cheaper to operate than a traditional car. But they're also not as safe, and you have to wear all the gear all the time if you actually want to be safe. Which is where this comes in. It's the Electra Meccanica Solo, a single-seat, three-wheeled microcar that is far smaller than a regular car, meaning it's easier to park, and theoretically could reduce the size and severity of the traffic jam on the morning commute. It's technically a motorcycle. Under US regulations it is, but it also has car controls with a regular steering wheel and seatbelt that you can operate with either a car license or a motorcycle one. It doesn't require you to wear all the usual motorcycle gear, and it has car-like controls. It's fully enclosed. It has a claimed 100-mile, 160-kilometer range. It's got a top speed of 80 miles per hour, 128 kph. And its 17.3 kilowatt-hour battery pack can recharge in about 3 hours from a level 2 charging station. And the 40 kilowatt-hour rear-wheel drivetrain and front steering gives you the better setup of the choices that you have for three-wheelers. I get to drive this for the very first time. Let's give it a go. The last time I sat behind the wheel of an Electra Meccanica, it was just a prototype. I wasn't allowed to drive it. The gauges and the switches had a much more prototypey feel. I'm not really phrasing it very well, but the inside of this car is much as you would expect for a production vehicle. It even has a fold-out key. There's no keyless ignition, there's no keyless entry, but put the key in the slot, turn it, you get a fully digital display in front of you. Both the radio and the display gauge are full color. Unfortunately, the radio has a habit of coming on because the radio hasn't been tuned, and that would get old very quickly. In terms of creature comforts, you have full air conditioning. You've got heating and cooling here, and the ability to divert air around various parts of the cabin. On this side of the car, you also have a heated seating control. So you can have low heat and high heat, fully electric windows on both sides. And to my right here, you have a fold down cup holder. It flips out, you can hold a nice beverage while you're on the road. Fully adjustable, electrically operated mirrors on both sides, and of course electronic trunk release to give you access to the rear, which has 3 cubic feet of cargo space. That's not small for a vehicle of this size. You might be noticing that I'm sitting pretty low down. That's because the 17.3 kilowatt hours of lithium-ion batteries sit either side of me, and I sit in between them. There's no airbags in this vehicle, but there are triple steel bars in each door to protect both you and the battery pack, and you've got a nice crumple zone up front. There's no airbags required because this is technically a motorcycle. Remember that, because it's going to be important later on. Now, when it comes to reversing, of course, you've got the 2 side mirrors that you can use, but if you select reverse, you'll also be presented with a full color display from the rear of the vehicle, along with reversing lines for your vehicle. They don't appear to change as you change the direction of the steering wheel though, so I would have to try that one out sometime in the future when I have the car for a little longer than I have it today. When Electra Meccanica asked me if I'd like to drive this car, I of course said yes. But one of the things they did tell me was that they only wanted people to drive it around a test track at the local shopping mall here at Washington Square, just outside of Portland. Now, they've let me take it around the parking lot, which means I get a little more of a taste of what the car is capable of. But I wish that they were allowing people to test drive this on the road, and that is a bit of a red flag to me. I'm hoping they're only doing it because they want people to have a short test drive in a very predictable environment to make up for the fact that there's only a few number of cars that they have on the actual display here. And so I'm going to go with that as the explanation. But there is one thing I've already noticed about this car, and that is how incredibly vague the steering is. There doesn't appear to be any kind of self-centering, and I'll try and demonstrate that now when I turn out of this junction onto the Mall Road. You'll see that when you have turned the steering wheel, it doesn't self-center, and that feels like a real missing thing for a vehicle that you're spending $18,500 on. It's nice that we have all of the creature comforts of a regular car. You have air conditioning and heaters. All right, so I'm going to let go of the steering wheel here, and it feels wobbly. It's a bit vague. It doesn't seem to center itself and get itself back in the lane. Now, that 40 kilowatt electric motor at the rear is not the perkiest. And I think the traction control has been set up to purposely nanny you so that you don't do anything stupid. For an electric car, that feels a little unfortunate. This thing has a 0 to 60 time of about 10 seconds. And I'm not able to reach that, obviously, in a parking lot environment. What I would say, however, is that there's that steering centering again, which just feels really vague and just not very well set up. I'm going to sneak into this little track they've got here, which allows me to push it a little bit more. One of the things I will say I really like about this car is the fact that it can do a very tight turning circle. So let's try this now. Okay, 26, 29, 34, 39, and braking. There's not a lot of regen braking on this. And going into the corners, I just feel like I have to be really careful about where the car wants to go. It's not stepping out at the back. As a three-wheeler, this actually feels pretty nice. I've driven a lot of three-wheelers that have made me feel a lot less stable. But the steering is just so vague. I have no idea where my wheels are. And that gives me a little bit of cause for concern, because it means that when I'm going around the track, when I'm trying to execute a move, and let me show you the turning circle now, it's super lightweight and you can do a very tight turning circle. I mean, I'm basically turning around in the equivalent of 2 car parking spaces. But when you come out of that, just trying to nail where the steering goes, it just feels a little vague. This is currently made in China, and the facility that was announced in Mesa, Arizona, is actually where they're going to be doing final assembly. So this is Chinese made, under contract, and then final assembly is taking place in the US. Now, the other thing I will say, and I don't know if I've set this up right, is that the air conditioning is a bit noisy and not very effective. I've turned it on low because when you're filming, obviously you try really hard not to make lots of excess noise in the car, because it makes it difficult from a filming point of view of making sure that the audio sounds good. But there's a lot of noise in the car. You feel a lot of, you hear a fair amount of suspension noise, you hear a fair amount of noise from other parts of the vehicle. And I did drive a different Solo earlier on today and heard a few grinding noises that did concern me slightly. Now, I don't think I'm lifting up that front wheel or anything like that. The steering is really making me worried. For nearly $20,000, if you ask me which I would prefer, I'm gonna say a motorbike, because for nearly $20,000, for a few $1,000s more, in fact for maybe $1,500 more, you could have an Energica SS9, which is a beast of an electric machine. It accelerates to 60 far quicker than this thing does. It obviously doesn't have all of the creature comforts, and you have to be a motorcyclist and you have to to be willing to wear motorcycle gear and take the risk of being on two wheels. But as a fun commuter vehicle, I know which one I would prefer. Now this has all of the creature comforts. It's got a radio, it's got air conditioning, it's got mirrors, it's got a nice storage area. But there's nothing about this right now that makes me feel that I want to buy one, I want to own one. If this was half the price, I'd be really tempted. If this was like 11, even if it's just 11,000, under 10,000 ideally, but 10, 11,000, I would totally want to buy one. I would totally be interested in buying one. And I think that would be the better solution. The lower price, and then it would be ideal for things like pizza delivery services. But even then, I'd want to modify that accelerator curve. Now we've got better pickup. I think maybe I've warmed the batteries up a little bit. I'm now seeing some regen on the dashboard here. But in the time that I have driven it around the parking lot, I've gone from 82% state of charge to 76% state of charge. I don't believe that I've covered that many miles. The mall is big, but it's not that big. This reminds me in a lot of ways of some of the earlier electric cars that I've driven. Cars that were designed not for speed, but for utility. And I think that's a fair thing to call this vehicle. It's clearly designed primarily to get you driving an electric vehicle rather than driving a regular internal combustion engined car. And for that, the Electra Meccanica Solo should be praised. But even with the air conditioning running pretty strongly right now, I've still got some misting issues here. Everything inside feels kind of plasticky and a little bit meh to the touch. It's not exactly high quality material. There's no problem mechanically with the car. It drives well. It's got decent brakes. The steering is really starting to irritate me. It doesn't have the acceleration curve I'd like. I've driven things with 40 kilowatt motors that had a far better throttle response than this thing. But let's talk about what else you could buy for $18,500. You could buy a used 2017, 2018 Nissan Leaf for $18,500. You could buy a used Chevrolet Bolt EV for $18,500. Now granted, this does have incentives available for it. So after you factor in the incentives, you're looking closer at $12,000, $13,000, $14,000, depending on where you are in the US. But even then, even if you look at $13,000, $14,000, $15,000, you could still buy a mainstream EV from an OEM automaker. It's a weird noise at the back there as I turn that corner, that would actually perform a whole lot better, that would actually be a whole lot easier to drive. So there you have it. I've been glad to have a test of this, but it's not something that I'm necessarily super excited about getting behind the wheel of. So there you have it. This is my first drive of the Electra Meccanica Solo EV. And I'll admit, there are elements of this vehicle that I really like. The folks here today want me to be very clear about the fact that this is not a performance vehicle. It's not a performance EV. It's aimed primarily at commuters in town and also at pizza delivery services and other commercial uses where a small vehicle comes into its own. This doesn't give me the thrill of a motorcycle, and its 10-second sprint time feels like an age in today's modern EV world. In fact, while I'm okay with its performance, it does remind me very much of the acceleration of the Mitsubishi i-MiEV and the first generation Nissan Leaf. Today's EVs have a lot more power than the Solo, and $18,500 US before incentives is going to mean that the performance and the handling aren't what you would expect for the price. However, with 3 cubic feet, 84 litres of lockable safe cargo space, all the air conditioning and bells and whistles and creature comforts that you would expect from a regular car with half of the footprint, this vehicle could sell in pretty high volumes in busy cities where space is at a premium and functionality and running costs trump performance and flexibility. I would love one if it was half the price. And this is going to be great for pizza delivery services and, frankly, a whole lot safer than the low-cost scooters that are usually used for those kind of duties. It's far more conventional. If you had to pull yourself out of wet motorcycle gear, you know how horrible it is riding in the rain. And if you find yourself shivering and desperately trying to warm your hands up on a cold morning on a motorbike, you'd rather be inside this. For the price, most people will just go with a used Chevrolet Bolt EV or others. They're now available for the price of this off lease. And compared to some of the other EVs coming to market, this doesn't have the super efficiency to back it up. If the Solo managed 3 times the range on the same energy, I'd be convinced. But as usual, I would like to reserve my final judgment until I've had a chance to get behind the wheel with this for an entire week. I suspect then I might really fall in love. Thanks to Electra Meccanica for allowing us a few test drive slots to film this review, and thanks to all of you guys for supporting this show. Thanks to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month patrons. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons. That's Regine Fellows, Gordon C., Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, Sean Ueda, and Tesla in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters. That's John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylin, and Ian. You can join all of these amazing Patreon supporters by following the links below, and you'll also find a link to send us a tip through Ko-fi or Bitcoin if you'd prefer to support us in that way. They're all valid. There's also a link below to our Discord chat server, so give that a go if you fancy. If you're feeling chatty, it's a great place to go. And as usual, you'll find everything from t-shirts to face masks and water bottles at our Redbubble store. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!